Welcome back, everybody. This is Days of Noah number 33, and as usual, let's just see if we can get through a quick review. We're talking about some complicated subject matter here, and the main point that I want to get across today, number one, is we've pretty much solidified in the last couple lectures that Baal, Moloch, Melkort, Baalis, these are all different names for the same entity who we know as Hercules. Baal, for example, means Lord, Moloch means king, and they're just different monikers for the same entity. That's an important thing to understand. And as we revealed in the last lecture, this same god, Baal, Moloch, Hercules, is none other than the Indian god Krishna and his twin brother Balarama. That's where the word Baal comes from, in Balarama. So we're seeing that the same gods that they were worshiping over in the Mediterranean, they're also worshiping over in the Far East. And then we even went so far as to say that some of the Egyptian gods lined up very specifically with Hercules and the Pillars of Hercules. And so we're seeing that different cultures come up with different names, but at the end of the day, it's the same God and all the same mythos and lore that go with it. Now we know who Hercules is. You study the Greek mythology. Hercules is a demigod. He's a half human, half mortal, half god. And obviously, that dates back to the Genesis 6 conspiracy, where the fallen angels mated with humans and then created the giant men of renown, the men of myth. And so my theory or conjecture has always been that prior to the flood, you had all the fallen angels and you had all of the Nephilim hybrids that were running around on this planet. And then the flood came, and then afterwards, all of the ancient civilizations continued to worship those pre-flood giants, and they built all of their architecture and did all of their rituals based on those Nephilim. Now we're seeing that that's what the research reveals, because all of these post-flood cultures are all worshiping these different gods who they have these different names for, like Baal, Moloch, Melkort, but we're finding out all along that those were all different names for Hercules, the demigod. So I believe that the research is confirming my suspicions in theory. Now, the Bible says in the Table of Nations that Egypt was started by Mizraim, who is one of the sons of Ham. If you remember, Ham was one of the wicked sons, and he had an illegitimate child, Canaan. And Canaan was the cursed seed line that would produce the giants. But we know Ham was wicked, so his other children were wicked too. Mizraim was one of them, and he was the founder of Egypt, according to the Bible. But when you study Egyptian mythology, they claim that the entire Egyptian royal dynasty was started by the Egyptian gods, specifically the ones who would be in line with Hercules. So what Egyptian lore says is that all of the pharaohs can be dated back to the hybrids, the demigods, going back to the flood era. I think that's very interesting because there may be some truth to that. And this even includes Ramses, who the Bible mentions in the Exodus account. Now we've got a lot of other historians like the Roman philosopher Cicero. He also confirms that over in India, that their Hercules is the same as Baalis, which is the one in Tyre and Sidon in Phoenicia. We've got guys like Captain Francis Wilford, who wrote his books, and he would even go as far as to say that the Indian Hercules is the same as Krishna. And in fact, he would go on to say that they are considered as one avatar or incarnation of Vishnu. Vishnu is another predominant Hindu god. He goes on to say that he's also called Balarama, a Baalis sprung from Vishnu or Hari. He is certainly Hercula, which is where we get the word Hercules, and over time that became Hercules. Now, if you look up the word Hari in Sanskrit, which is Hindu Indian language, the word Hari, H-E-R-I, refers to the gods. And there's a lot of different words in Hinduism that start with Hari, like Hari Kiri and Hari Krishna and so on and so forth. In this case, Hercules refers to the mythological giant gods. And that is where the Greeks got the word Hercules from. They took the compound Indian Sanskrit word and they smashed it all together and turned it into Hercules. Now, Indian historian James Todd wrote a book, and he says how invaluable such remnants of an ancient race of Hercula. That's really interesting because this ancient race of Hercula is the Nephilim. Hercula means god of strength. They're talking about the ancient gods who were men of renown, the giants who were super strong, and they were their own ancient race. And that's exactly what he's speaking of here. He goes on to say that they have the attributes of the god of strength. Both are lords of the race. See the race, Kula? Kula means race. Hari means God. So these are a race of gods. A different race it's a totally distinct race from mankind. They're not Adamites. They're not made in the image of Adam and Eve, but they're made in the image of something else. They're these big men, the same ones that the Greeks have turned into Hercules. So it's all the same thing, just different cultures have tweaked things. Now we also learned that the ancient god of Tyre, known as Melkort, is also Hercules. And they called him the Lord of Tyre, and his name was Baal-Sur. There's the word Baal. So once again, we know for a fact that Baal and Moloch of the Old Testament is the same thing as Melkort and Hercules. And according to Tyrian legends, Melkort, or Hercules, was considered to be the progenitor of the Tyrian royal family. So what we're seeing time and time again is that when you study the ancient mythos, these old Herculean type demigods are the ones who started these different royal families, these different bloodlines. Now, if you recall from several lectures ago, we studied the double-headed phoenix. We said that that was one of the oldest royal crests that's ever been known to mankind, ever. And you can find it on many royal flags, such as Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, Archduke of Austria, and King of Spain, and Lord of the Netherlands. And he was part of the royal house of the Habsburgs. And today we're going to take a look at some of the royal houses. I believe that these royal houses can be traced all the way back to the seed of the serpent and the Canaanites going back into the Old Testament. These are the royal houses that produce kings of Bohemia, Hungary, Croatia, Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, Austria, etc. And what you'll find about these royal families is they always intermarried with other royal families because they were always emphasizing preserving the royal bloodlines, the DNA. It was very important to preserve the DNA. Now we've shown time and time again that the double-headed phoenix is an occult symbol. We see it all over the Masonic religion. It's one of the oldest royal crests. In my opinion, it is one of the predominant symbols for the seed of the serpent and the royal bloodlines that go all the way back to the Nephilim. And we see that it's one of the symbols for the modern. It's on a modern symbol of Russia, including the royal house of Romanov. So it's the double-headed phoenix has been used in many royal flags, including the House of Habsburg, the Royal House of Romanov. It's even used as the Scottish Rite Freemasonry as the Order of the Royal Secret. So, it's a very predominant symbol. Now, Albert Pike is one of the most famous Freemasons that's ever walked the planet. I believe that he was a Civil War general. Very prominent man, very influential. This is an image of him. You'll notice, of course, that it has the pyramid. We know that they're obsessed with Egyptology. The 33rd, of course, stands for the 33 degrees of Freemasonry. We see that there are 33 is an important number in the Masonic religion. You see all these rays of illumination, kind of like on our dollar bill above the triangle. That stands for the illuminated ones, the Illuminati, the Enlightenment, Lucifer, the light bearer, all that stuff. Here's your double-headed phoenix right here. Here's your double-headed phoenix right here. Notice it has a royal crown over the top of it because the double-headed phoenix refers to royalty, as does the fleur-de-lis. And then he's got a symbol here. I'm not sure what that is. So it looks like another double-headed eagle to me, possibly. Now, he wrote a famous book called The Morals and Dogma, The Ancient and Accepted Rite of Freemasonry. And what do you see on the cover? Once again, you've got your double-headed eagle, which really stands for the double-headed phoenix. That dates back all the way to the Phoenician Canaanites. Usually it's a purple bird. They get that from Phoenicia, where they made all the purple cloth from the seashells. We've reviewed that in past lectures. You see the crown on it because it represents royalty. You see the Egyptian pyramid because these same Egyptian gods are part of all this. They all worship Osiris, Isis, Horus. Egyptology is a big part of Freemasonry, as we'll see later. And you've got the rays of illumination. Here you've got the famous Latin motto, Ordo ab Chao. That means order from chaos. In other words, they're the ones who are controlling the destiny of the world. They're the ones who create the wars. And then out of the ashes of all of the chaos, they create the order. So Ordo ab Chao is a Latin term that really, at the end of the day, can be translated as the New World Order, because that's what they're all about. They're about creating the chaos so that they can create the New World Order. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Now, in the last lecture, we discussed about how all the Masons, including Pike, are obsessed with what they refer to as the Hiramic legends. That would be the legends of Hiram. And it's not King Hiram of Tyre, but rather King Hiram's #1 Freemason, who was named after him, called Hiram Abiff. And we discussed a lot of the temple lore that revolves around Hiram Abiff, how he was the master mason that King Hiram of Tyre sent to Israel to help King Solomon build the temple. And 1 Kings 7 reveals that it was Hiram himself who was responsible for creating the pillars at the entrance of Solomon's temple. Now we know that Hiram was from Tyre, and we know that the Tyrians are the ones who slapped up the 2 pillars of Hercules all across the Mediterranean, starting in Greece, Italy, Spain, Egypt, Morocco, all through that region. And so this Freemason was well trained in all of the customs of the Masons. And he's the one who put these on Solomon's temple. And this is what Albert Pike, the guy that we just looked at in the previous slide, this is what he said in the Morals and Dogma. You entered the Masonic lodge between the 2 columns. They represent the 2 which stood in the porch of the temple on each side of the great eastern gateway. These pillars of bronze were, according to the most authentic accounts, that in the first and that in the second book of Kings, confirmed in Jeremiah, 18 cubits high with a capital 5 cubits high. The capitals were enriched by pomegranates of bronze, covered by bronze network, and ornamented with wreaths of bronze, and appeared to have imitated the shape of the seed vessel of the lotus or the Egyptian lily, a sacred symbol to the Hindus and the Egyptians. Now, I don't doubt that that's exactly what the pomegranates and all the wreaths represent, because, again, that part of the temple all came from Hiram. That all has pagan roots from the Pillars of Hercules, and so that's likely all to be accurate. Now, Pike goes on to say right here, these columns were imitations by Hiram, the Tyrian artist, of the great columns consecrated to the winds and fire at the entrance to the famous temple of Malkarth Hercules in the city of Tyre. So there you go. Albert Pike, one of the leading 33rd degree Freemasons, says in his famous book Morals and Dogma that Boaz and Jachin, the two pillars in the front of King Solomon's temple, were built by the Tyrian artist Hiram, and that those were imitations of the temple of Hercules in the city of Tyre, which were consecrated to the winds and the fire. See, the temple was used as a gateway, witchcraft and sorcery. We're going to get into that as we continue to move forward. That's what the Masons are into. They're into all of the sorcery. So, this was the beginning of temple lore. And what we see throughout Freemasonry is that there are many legends which revolve around the concepts of this guy, Hiram. The life, death, and resurrection of Hiram Abiff replace the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And you will never see hardly any symbology of Christ throughout any of Freemasonry. They pretend to be Christians, but they're not. Now, in the last lecture, we made an extremely important connection between this guy right here, who is Hiram, this Freemason, and Tubal-cain, who in Genesis 4 we're told was the instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Now, if you recall in previous lectures, Tubal-cain means the smiths. All the blacksmiths and the goldsmiths and the metalworkers, they all derive their skills from Tubal-cain. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA, it's part of the seed of the serpent. Tubal-cain was the godfather of this group of people, and this word artificer is only used one time in all of Scripture, both Old and New Testament, and it means someone who has perfected and become a master craftsman of working with brass and iron. So he is the original first Mason. And it's interesting that we see all of the symbology regarding Hiram, who was several millennia later after Tubal-cain. I mean, this is way after the flood when Solomon builds the temple. And what are they saying about him? But he's the great architect and the artificer. And that's very important that they would use that word to denote Hiram. Same thing over here, Hiram the artificer. What they're saying there is that Hiram is one of these smiths who can be genetically connected all the way back to his ancient predecessor, Tubal-cain. And this is one of the smoking guns in regards to the seed of the serpent. And, there'll be people who argue that, but then I would dare ask them to explain why Tubal-cain is so enshrouded in Freemasonry. If Tubal-cain and Hiram are not connected, then why is Hiram being referred to as an artificer, which we know is what's said about Tubal-cain, and why is Tubal-cain one of their symbols and one of their passwords in Freemasonry? You have to explain that one. It's unexplainable. It can only be explained through one way, and that is that Hiram, the Phoenician Canaanite, is connected to Tubal-cain, the Kenite before the flood. And I would subscribe to you with 100% certainty that they are part of the same genetic bloodline. So make no mistake, you'll see Tubal-cain, as you do here, right here, Tubal-cain. He's holding an anvil. He's getting ready to beat on a piece of metal because he is the master metal craftsman. Same thing over here. Here's another image of Tubal-cain. This time he's holding a sword and a hammer because he is the master of creating edged weapons. And they use the same words to describe Hiram, who built the 2 pillars with the wreath wrapped around it. This is where we get the dollar symbol. If you recall, this is where we get the dollar symbol, the 2 pillars with the wreath wrapped around it. That came from the pillars of Hercules. And so Freemasonry recognizes that Hiram Abiff descends from Tubal-cain. He was the first master mason. So I want to get back to some of the roots of these Phoenician Canaanite masons. And we're going to spend some time talking about Tyre and Sidon and mainly Bashan. We're going to see that Bashan appears to be the epicenter of the Old Testament giants and Baal worship. Now over here you can see a map, and what you'll notice is up here in Syria we have a town called Baal Gad. That's an area where they worship Baal. We know that's Hercules. Here is Sidon and Tyre. This is where all the Canaanite Phoenicians do all their sailing, and where they get a lot of their supplies. Remember, this is all fertile land with palm trees and palm dates, which is one of the largest produces that they make in terms of fruits. And then over here in Syria, we see Mount Hermon. That'll become pertinent in a minute, Damascus. And then right here is Bashan. Notice here, the Amorites, Og. We're going to talk about King Og. We're going to talk about his brother down here, Sihon, who is the Amorite of Heshbon. So the Amorites split up their land into a northern section and a southern section, governed by 2 large, giant Nephilim brothers, Og and Sihon. So let's just review what the scriptures have to say about them. First of all, Tyre and Sidon is where all the merchants and the maritime people along the coast were, while the area of Bashan over here was the mountainous region that has all the cedars of Lebanon, the big oak trees, the oaks of Bashan. It's very mountainous, a lot of rocky land. It's very high in altitude. You get snow up there. And so Deuteronomy 3. So the Lord our God delivered into our hands Og, king of Bashan, and all his people we smote, until none was left to him remaining. Now in the Strong's Concordance, when you look up the word Og, it means long-necked and gigantic in stature, and it says that it's one of the last giants of the Rephaim. Now, the Rephaim are a particular type of Nephilim. So in our own Bible, King James, it tells us right here that Og is a giant. Verse 4, and we took all his cities at that time, 80 cities. So over here in Bashan, King Og had 30 cities in this area. Actually, we're going to find out he had more than that. He had 60, but... And all these cities were fenced with high walls, gates, and bars. And we utterly destroyed them, as we did unto Sihon, king of Heshbon. Now, Heshbon means a stronghold. That's down here. That's this city down here of Heshbon. It means stronghold, and in the Strong's Concordance, it was considered to be one of the royal cities of the Amorites. And we're going to find out that there's a bunch of royal cities because they have royal bloodlines. The Amorites are the ones who are preserving the royal bloodlines. Now, I think it's important that all these cities of these Nephilim were fenced with high walls, gates, and bars. So we know that they're the smiths. We know that they're the masons. We know that they're masters of working in metal and stone. And so these are the guys who built up all these big, huge megalithic cities that we're going to get into here momentarily. Now notice what Joshua is saying. We utterly destroyed every man, woman, and child of every city. So that's what God commanded them to do. When they came across the Jordan River and when they came into the promised land of Canaan, God charged them with wiping out all of the Canaanites, every man, woman, and child, because he knew that this was the seed of the serpent, this was the Nephilim, these were the hybrids that survived the flood, or at least their DNA did. Verse 7, but all the cattle and the spoil of the cities we took for ourselves. So they killed every man, woman, and child, but they kept the spoils and the animals for themselves. Now, we really need to think about this. We're talking about 30 cities full of Amorites. And Joshua and the Israelites came through and they killed all of them. Every man, every woman, every child, all the babies, the newborns, they were all slaughtered by the Israelites as a fulfillment of God's command. Verse 8, and we took the land that was on this side Jordan, from the river of Arnon all the way up to Mount Hermon. Now, Mount Hermon means sanctuary. And the reason it means sanctuary is because the Amorites worship Mount Hermon. And this is the epicenter of Baal worship. And the reason why is, if you recall, is this is where the fallen angels descended onto Mount Hermon, and this is where they made the pact, the solemn blood pact, to contaminate the women genetically. So it's very important. Verse 9, which Hermon the Sidonians call Sirion, and the Amorites call Shinir. Now, Sirion means breastplate or coat of mail. That's what they named. That's what some of these Sidonians would refer to Mount Hermon as breastplate or coat of mail. Now, they're the metal workers, they're the smiths, they're the ones who invented, the fallen angels taught them how to make all of the coat of mail and the breastplates and the helmets and the shields and stuff. So that's consistent. Now, the word Amorite means mountaineer. So these are the first mountain men. Down here in this area, they're the flatlanders, the lowlanders. And up here in Bashan, they're the highlanders, or the mountain men, or the mountaineers. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. There it is. See that? Og was a giant. Indeed, his bedstead was an iron bed. 9 cubits is its length, and 4 cubits its width, according to the standard cubit. The cubit goes from the tip of your elbow to the tip of your middle finger. It's about 21 inches long. And so when you do the math on that, 9 by 4 cubits ends up being 15 by 6 foot size bed. So King Og had a bed that was 15 feet long, 6 feet wide, and the frame had to be made out of iron to carry him. Now, there are a lot of scholars who've looked at this, and they estimate that he weighed approximately 3,000 pounds. So this is one big, huge man. And he's, an average man back then was 5 foot 8 inches tall. And so he's anywhere from 14 to 15 feet tall. So he's double the height of a regular man. And you got to understand that he is a remnant of the giants. That means that over the centuries, as they've diluted the blood pool, the gene pool, that you're getting watered down genetics, and you're getting less and less of the Nephilim strain, so that they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Just like Goliath much later, Goliath also is a remnant of a giant. He's only 10 foot tall. If we could go back before the flood, we don't know how big they were. They could have been 30, 50, 60 feet tall for all we know. But we know that Og was almost 15 foot tall. He was a big man. And we're told right in the King James text that he's a remnant of the giant. So anybody who tries to argue that there were giants in the Old Testament, they just haven't read their Bible flat out. Verse 13, and the rest of Gilead and all of Bashan, being the kingdom of Og and all the region of Argob, that means stony, because that's where all the stones were located, with all of Bashan, which was called the land of the giants. Bashan is the epicenter of the giants. Now later in 1 Chronicles, there's a verse that says, and the children of the half-tribe of Manasseh dwelt in the land, and they increased from Bashan all the way to Baal Hermon. So even when the Israelites took over this land, they used the same names. They still refer to it as Bashan. And notice that it's no longer Mount Hermon, but the Israelites referred to it as Baal Hermon. And when you look that word up, it means the Lord of Destruction, a city at the foot of Mount Hermon, known as the seat of Baal worship. So, we now know that Baal and Moloch is the same thing as Hercules. It all derives from the Genesis 6 conspiracy. Hercules was a half human, half god, which the Greeks referred to them as demigods, but we now know that they were Nephilim. And all these giants descend from these Nephilim that had the contamination in Genesis 6. So it's been a long time since we reviewed the book of Enoch. I think it was on Days of Noah number 5 or number 6 where we went through Enoch. So it's been over 30 chapters ago. So I thought this is an excellent time to quickly review it. Enoch 6:1. And it came to pass when the sons of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters, and the angels, the sons of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and let us beget children. Then their leader Semyaza said to them, I fear you will not indeed agree to do this sin, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of this great sin. And they answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do it. And they were all 200 who descended in the days of Jared upon the summit of Mount Hermon. It's very important. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations. So the word Hermon in the Strong's Concordance means sanctuary. And I think that the reason why it means that is because of this oath that they took. They bound themselves through this oath, and so that is a sacred mountain to the seat of the serpent. Book number 7, chapter 7, and all of the others together with them took upon themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. This is where all your sorcery and witchcraft come from. And they became pregnant, and they bare giants whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. So now we're seeing cannibalism, blood drinking, etc. And they began to then sin against the birds, the beasts, and the reptiles, and the fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink their blood. That's two different sins there. They began to sin against the birds, the beasts, and the reptiles means that they began to have sex with them and desire them sexually. This is the origin of bestiality. And they also were crossbreeding them. And then they began to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. Enoch 8. And Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. Now, we just reviewed in the previous chapter that some of these areas are in the Strong's Concordance are named after the breastplate and the coat of mail. And he made them known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. Now we know who the first person in the Bible is who has made known the metals of the earth and the art of working them. It's Genesis 4 with Tubal-cain. He was the great artificer of making edged weapons. This is the same time that the fallen angels had descended in the days of Jared, the same time that Tubal-cain is alive on this planet. So it's apparent that these fallen angels pursued the seed of the serpent, the Canaanites, and revealed to them the secrets of heaven. And then that was the birth of the Smiths, as we see, as we reviewed a few lectures ago. They also taught them the working of bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and coloring tinctures. So this is where we get all our perfume and makeup and dyes for the hair. This is where we get, the idea of wearing jewelry like stones around your finger and around your neck, and currency, etc. Semyaza taught enchantments, and the angels taught astrology, the constellations, the knowledge of the clouds, the signs of the earth and the sun, the course of the moon. So this is everything from, star worship, the zodiac, all the constellations, etc. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went to heaven. Chapter 8. And Azazel taught men, chapter 9. Thou seest what Azazel has done, who has taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And they've gone to the daughters of men upon the earth, and have slept with the women, and have defiled themselves, and revealed to them all kinds of sin. And the women have borne giants, and the whole earth is thereby filled with blood and unrighteousness. So, this is what Genesis 6 is all about. This is why the flood came. And we see that the seed of the serpent survives the flood and is reestablished after the flood through Ham's illegitimate son Canaan. And Canaan gives birth to the Canaanites, and one of his firstborn sons is Sidon, and he is responsible for making the city of Tyre and Sidon, which is where all of the Phoenician Canaanites come from. Now we're learning that King Og of Bashan is right there just south of Mount Hermon, and that this is where all the giant stonemason were living, and that this is also where the epicenter of Baal worship, where they would raise all these altars to Baal, who we now know as Hercules. You say, well, what are these altars? Well, some of them are these great big pillars with the royal arch that they would raise to the god Hercules or Baal. So it's really important that we understand and establish that it is the seed of the serpent bloodline in the Old Testament who are the ones before and after the flood who start this whole concept of royalty. They're the ones who start this concept of trying to preserve and maintain royal bloodlines. They're the ones who raise up kings and start the monarchies and the feudal systems that would continue to develop throughout history. And we see it with a lot of different verses. Psalm 135, we smote the great nations and slew all the mighty famous kings. We're going to find out that all these mighty famous kings were Nephilim kings, such as Sihon, the king of the Amorites, Og, king of Bashan, and all the kingdoms of Canaan. See, Canaan is full of a bunch of kingdoms because they're the ones who started the kingdoms. They're the ones who raised up the kings, and they started the bloodlines. Amos 2 talks about, I destroyed the Amorites whose height was like the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. So the way that we should interpret that verse is that these Amorites, like Og, the 15-foot giant, he is as tall as some of those trees, and he is as strong as some of the oaks, literally. It's a literal verse. Here in Joshua 13, some of the kingdoms of King Og stretch out across Jair, which are in Bashan, 60 cities. So, we're seeing that just in Bashan alone right here, this area, we've got 60 cities stretching out across here. Some of these are royal cities, as we'll see later. 1 Kings 4 talks about later the son of Geber, who's in the region of Argob, which is in Bashan, has 80 great cities, that's 60 total cities, many which have walls, brazen bars, and fortresses. So when you look these words up, what you begin to realize is that these cities are all fortified. These cities are all fortified with big metal gates, fortresses, cross beams, big giant walls, etc. And you say, well, why is that? Because these are a warring type people. If you look over here at the land of Canaan before the Israelites came in and settled this region, it's just a big area full of different groups of people. Many of them are Nephilim groups. All of the sons of Canaan. Canaan was the illegitimate son of Ham. He was the one who gave rise to the Canaanites. All of his children, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Girgasites, etc., those are all different versions of Nephilim. We know that the Philistines had to have some of that fallen blood in them, because it says that Goliath was a remnant of a giant. So the Philistines can also be traced back to some of the Nephilim. Same thing with the Amalekites. Esau married some of the hybrids and mixed this two seed lines. So what you find out about this whole region, stretching from Phoenicia up here all the way down to Israel, is that it was full of these different Nephilim tribes, and they're different clans. They're all related to each other on a larger level, but just like all of humanity, they've split off. They've made their own groups. They've started their own nation states. They have their own royal bloodlines. They've picked out their own kings. Some of them have their own social systems, their own cultural differences. Some of them worship slightly different gods than the others. At the end of the day, they're all very similarly related, but they're a warring type people. And so they're constantly going to war with each other. One neighboring clan of Nephilim, whether it be the Amorites, are trying to conquer the Girgashites or the Perizzites. And so naturally, they build these huge cities, big walls, big gates, fortresses. They come from the seed of the Smiths, dating back to Tubal-cain. They have the master masons are within these different clans. They know how to use the metals. They know how to build the different architectural walls and things. And so they fortified everything for this reason. And these have over time turned into these kingdoms. Now, it's important to understand that the Nephilim are where the idea of these royal bloodlines originate. The seed of the serpent is a bloodline, and they set up kingdoms all across the land of Canaan, and they set up the idea of royalty and kingship. An example of this would be in Joshua 10, that they feared greatly because Gibeon was a great city as one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all the men thereof were mighty. When you study the Gibeon and the Gibeonites, as well as Ai and Jericho, we remember learning about the giant walls of Jericho. These are all Nephilim Canaanite groups. And so, as we see here, the word royal city. Now, the word royal down here, there's a lot of different versions of it, but it's the word Melech, which means king of royalty, usually of a royal bloodline or royal dynasty. So, and we're going to look at some more verses that demonstrate this, but the important thing to understand is that going back to the beginning of recorded history, the origin and concept of royalty and kingship did not originate from God. The Nephilim tribes created the royal bloodlines, and they started all of the monarchies and the feudal systems that still exist in some places today. There are many Old Testament examples of Nephilim people groups who follow the pathway of royalty. They have kings and lord and princes and royal cities all throughout the Old Testament. Now, when you contrast with Israel, God's holy and separated nation of Israel was never intended to be ruled by kings. Men in their ignorance requested a king from God, and God allowed it as a concession. But he warned the people of Israel that a monarchy would be a liability to them more than it would be an asset. But Israel wanted to be like all of the surrounding pagan nations. So over time, God gave them a concession. And God gave them the prophet Saul, and then eventually King David. And we know, of course, that this is part of the proto-evangelium. King David leads to Jesus Christ, and this is the seed of the woman. So there was some prophecy that would allude to the fact that there would be a bloodline on God's side as well. We have the seed of the woman and we have the seed of the serpent. But the kingship, as we'll see in a moment, was not the original design. So all of these two seed lines, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, are based on genetics. On God's side, we're dealing with the Semites. And in a similar but contrasting way, the Canaanites had their own bloodlines that they preserved for millennia. And that was the seed of the serpent. The Canaanite groups have maintained their bloodlines through arranged marriages with other royal bloodlines since the beginning of recorded history, so that they could maintain the seed of the serpent genetics. And this is who the bloodlines of the Illuminati truly are. They're the seed of the serpent, and these are all of the power structure going back through recorded history, who ruled all the governments, they ruled all the financial systems, and they ruled the monarchies of the entire world since the beginning of time. And they have been the ones who've been behind the curtains, pulling all the strings on this planet and directing this planet in the direction that it's gone. They're working directly under Satan and the fallen angelic hierarchy. Now, when you go back and think about some of the medieval times and all of the dark ages that existed with the royal bloodlines, the only thing that separated the royalty from the common people, or the peasants, if you will, was one thing. And that's the blood, their genetics. If you weren't part of the royalty, then you were just a peasant. You know, back in those days, there were two classes of people. The low class, the peasants, which made up 99% of the population, and then the 1% kings and queens and princesses and dukes and lords, and they were the 1% royalty who had all the wealth and all the power. If you weren't in that group, if you were part of the 99%, you really had no chance to prosper. You just eked out your existence like everybody else. You worked strictly for the purpose of paying taxes and feeding the monarchy. They have always been in control of mankind. This 1% royalty, this group of royalty, have always been in control since the very beginning. They've been the powers that have created and dictated all of the different wars, all of the different taxation, all of the different living conditions that have always been present on Earth. They are the silent partner in the shadows who've been controlling everything from day one. Now, that's hard for a lot of people to accept, because most people think that everything that happens on this planet is just random, that wars just spark up randomly, and all of the world's governing policies are all random. They don't see that there's a much higher level of intelligence that's controlling it all. Ultimately, it's the prince of the power of the air, the supernatural sophisticated spirit of Satan and the demonic hierarchy, but they're working through the royal bloodlines of the Illuminati, who are really nothing more than the seed of the serpent. So these are the same royal bloodlines that are here on this planet today. They're the same ones that are in control of the world today, and they're the same ones who are basically leading us towards this new world order beast system. And this actually explains why a lot of today's world leaders and presidents are all related. Now, we're not going to get into this at this moment, but later we're going to show you how a vast majority of the wealthiest people on the planet today and the world leaders are all kin. They're all related. In fact, about 90% of American presidents have been related through blood. This is part of the royal bloodlines, and a lot of them are related to the European royal bloodlines as well. So I quickly want to review 1 Samuel 8, which reveals that God's original plan was not to have a king over the nation of Israel, but that's something that the Israelites adopted from the pagan Nephilim Canaanite nations. Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, they took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathering together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the other nations. The word nations is goyim. That's what non-Jews, including even Judaism today, refer to all of non-Jews, all of the pagans. That word means heathens, pagans, and Gentiles, and is in reference to non-Semitic peoples of that era, which are the Canaanites, the seed of the serpent. Verse 6, but this thing displeased Samuel. See, Samuel was displeased that they said, give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. So what God is saying is, he set up a situation where there would be prophets and judges, and they would be the ones who would help run everything. And he didn't want all the power to be consolidated under one person. But what God is saying here is, they've rejected you, Samuel, and they've rejected me because I was going to reign over them. So you can go ahead and give them a concession here and give them what they want. Verse 9, now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king, and he said, this will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He'll take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots and to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s. He will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers, and he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and he'll give them to his servants. He'll take a tenth of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officers and his servants. Notice that this is where taxation comes in. He's taking a tenth of everything now. He'll take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men, and your donkeys and put them to his work. He'll take a tenth of your sheep, and you will be his servants. And you will cry out in that day because of your king who you've chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. So can it be any clearer here? I mean, this is absolutely clear that God did not want them originally to have a king. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they still said, no, we will have a king over us, that we may be like all of the nations, the pagans. That's who has kings. The pagans are the ones who set up the pecking order, where you've got this hierarchy of the royal bloodlines and all of the lower levels underneath them, where you work to serve the monarchy. And that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, heed their voice and make them a king. This is a perfect example where God gives the nation of Israel a concession, even though it goes against his will. We've already seen this in previous chapters when it comes to building the temple. Same thing there. God never said he wanted David to build him a house of cedar, but he gave him a concession. And this is where confusion lies, because after God concedes, he'll go on to still continue to work through the seed of the woman, work through the Israelites, and he'll continue to bless them. So, of course, God's going to work through the nation of Israel. He's going to work through the monarchy. He's going to work through the kingdom of David. And he's going to work through the Davidic throne and bless it. but that doesn't mean that that was his original desire. Although I do believe that at some point he would have probably started the Davidic bloodline in order to fulfill prophecy, but it may not necessarily have been a kingship designed in the nature of the pagan nations and the way they had it. So now if we move forward, we'll see how what kind of king God gave him initially. 1 Samuel 9, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zerah, the son of Becherath, the son of Aphiah, and a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And he had a choice and handsome son. Okay? He had a choice and handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person among Israel. From his shoulders upwards, he was taller than all the other people. And then Samuel took the flask of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and anointed him and said, "Is it not because the Lord has anointed you commander over his inheritance?" See, God was trying to demonstrate that when you give the people what they want, which is a pagan, which is a king like all the pagan nations, and you choose the men of whom man would choose, which is the tallest, broadest shouldered, most handsome king, that is a fleshly, carnal decision. And what you're going to get out of that is a king who does all this stuff up here. He takes a tenth of your spoil. He takes your finest young men. He, taxes you. He takes your sheep, etc. But we know later that when God chooses the next king after, we know that Saul doesn't fulfill his job of wiping out all the Amalekite Canaanites. He spares some of that seed line, that bloodline, and by not listening to God and Samuel, he ends up losing his kingship. But then God goes and picks a more natural king that God finds suitable, and it's the smallest little runt of the litter of Jesse, which is King David, the shepherd boy, who is a man after God's own heart because he has the heart that God's looking for. And so God, he sets an example here with King Saul that if you make a decision based on outward appearances, it's going to fail you. But once it fails you, then God sets up the throne of David based on inward appearances. And there's plenty of verses in the Old Testament that confirm all of the royalty, the royal bloodlines, the kingships, the royal cities, the royal seed lines. We're just going to rip through a couple of them here. Genesis 14, and it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elsiar, and Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, the king of Sodom, and with Bishra, the king of Gomorrah, and with Shinab, the king of Adbah, and Shedemer, the king of Zebulon. So we see that all of these pagan nations all have different kings, and they don't get along that well. Just because they're all part of the seed of the serpent doesn't mean that they always get along. And so since they have that satanic spirit in them, their nature is to be rivals with some of their neighboring cousins, and we see these battles between all these kingdoms. These are all different branches of the seed of the serpent who are warring with one another. Numbers 21, and when the king of Arad, the Canaanite, that demonstrates a kingship. The king Arad received his throne from his father, and him from his father, because there's a royal bloodline there. Numbers 21, and Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites. And we know that King Og and King Sihon are remnant of the giants. So again, they received their crown and their throne from their father and from their grandfather, which was part of a royal bloodline. And again, Joshua 2, we see the king of Jericho. We see that before Joshua conquered Jerusalem, it was run by Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem. And we also see that these other cities, Jericho had a king. Here we see that king of Hebron, and Piram, king of Jarmuth, and Japhia, king of Lachish, and Deber, king of Eglon. All of these are Nephilim, Canaanite bloodlines. Joshua 10, therefore the 5 kings of the Amorites. See, we were told about King Og and King Heshbon, but as we see there are more kings within the Amorites. Remember, they had all those 60 cities? a lot of those cities are governed by a king. The king of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, all of these kings. 2 Kings 11 talks about, and when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed the royal seed. That's referring to someone who's in line for the throne. 2 Samuel 12, and Joab fought against Rabbah of the king of Ammon and took the royal city. It's not just a city, they're royal cities. Continuing on, the 5 lords of the Philistines and the Canaanites and the Sidonians and the Hivites that dwell in Mount Hermon, from Mount Baal Hermon all the way to Hamath. See the lords here? This lordship is under a kingship or a dynasty based on royal blood. You say, well, what blood is it? Well, it's not the Semitic bloodline. It's not the seed of the woman. So there's only one other bloodline left. It's the seed of the serpent. And it's the royal, this is the royal bloodline of the Illuminati going all the way back. These are the powerful warlords that controlled all of the world at that time. So the point I'm trying to make here is I'm trying to demonstrate this concept of maintaining the blood, the genetics, the DNA. It's clear in the Old Testament that these Canaanite groups all set up monarchies and placed the kings on the throne. And then these kings had children, and they passed the throne down to their children, and it went on for centuries and centuries and centuries, and that these royal groups only intermarried with other royalty, and they tried to keep the genetics as pure as possible. And this is considered the royal bloodlines that have been on the planet from the beginning of time all the way to today. Now, the difference with today is there's been so many thousands of years that have passed from then to now that the bloodlines have continually been diluted. So yes, of course, before the flood, they were humongous. And then right away after the flood, we already see them getting smaller. I mean, King Og was only 15 feet. And then even a little bit later, we see Goliath, who's a remnant of the giant. He's only 10 feet. And so as you can see, they're getting more diluted, and they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller until you get down to a normal size man, which would be all the kings and the royal bloodlines of the Dark Ages. You know, 1,000 years ago, there wasn't giants running around. That was thousands of years before that. But there were plenty of kings, like the Merovingian dynasty and the Carolingian dynasty, which were specific bloodlines that they kept it in the family for centuries. And you can trace them all the way back. And so what's happened is even though the Nephilim strain has gotten more and more diluted until eventually you come down to a people group that are a normal size, they're maybe 6 foot tall like the rest of us, but still they have that genetic memory going all the way back. They're still part of this bloodline, albeit diluted, and they still are part of that power structure. They're the ones who reign on the throne. They're the ones who set up the wars. They're the ones who tax the people. They're the ones who control the environment. And so even though they're not Nephilim on the level of what they were millennia ago, a little leaven ruins the whole batch. If you've got that Nephilim strain that within your blood, and we don't know how, genetics are very complicated. We don't know if it skips generations or if it's autosomal recessive or dominant genes that come out. But at the end of the day, there's a particular reason why all kings and queens from today going all the way back to the beginning of time have only kept it within a certain bloodline. And this is why. They're trying to preserve that aspect of the seed of the serpent. That the concept of preserving a royal bloodline originated with the fallen angels and the hybrids who wanted to maintain their genetics, and we see that play out throughout humanity all the way up to today. Only today they're not giants anymore. The genes have been too diluted for them to express a giant, but rather a normal sized person. I hope that makes sense. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to list off all these kings. I've already mentioned a bunch of them. Joshua 12 lists the 31 kings of the Canaanites. 31 kings that stretched all across the land of Canaan, going all the way north near Lebanon and Bashan, all the way down south of Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. So these were all the royal bloodlines that occupied that area. And there's a few more verses here that we were going to reveal. 1 Samuel 15:8. This is where the king of Saul destroys the Amalekites, but he leaves the king alive. So King Saul was charged with wiping out all of the Amalekites and snuffing out the bloodline. But what does he do? He goes in, he destroys all of the Amalekites, and he preserves the king. Well, it's the king who has the royal seed line because he got it from his father and his grandfather going all the way back. And so because King Saul allowed this king here, Agag, to survive and continue to have posterity, that is why God turned away from Saul and stripped him of the throne and allowed him to be destroyed by his enemies. So this was really important, that Israel was charged with completely wiping these people out. All of them. Babies, children, women, all of them. And don't forget, we already reviewed all the chapters on King Hiram of Tyre. He was also part of these royal bloodlines. He is the one who sent in all of the masons to help build David's house. So as you can see, there was significant royalty going all the way back to the time of Canaan. It was not part of God's original plan, as we've already demonstrated. And now I want to get into some of the details of some of these large royal cities, because this is where all of the ancient stonemasons and all of the original master craftsmen and Freemasons originated from. Those 60 royal cities in Bashan didn't just build themselves. It required great architect and skill to build them. And one of the people who really helped reveal this is a man by the name of Porter, who in the 1800s went into Syria, up into the area of Bashan, and he drew schematics and pictures of all of the 60 cities that he went through. And what he found is that there were ancient ruins going back thousands of years that more recent cultures had settled and made additions to, but he was able to clearly discern between the most recent additions of the last millennia versus thousands of years ago when the original stonemasons had quarried them. And what he found is that there were huge megalithic structures all throughout Bashan that he believed were these royal cities discussed in Scripture. And so this is his book right here, Giant Cities of Bashan. He has a picture of these big pillars, which we're going to take a look at. Syria's holy places. And we're talking about this area right here, Bashan, where King Og, who was a remnant of the giant, occupied. And it's right here just south of Mount Hermon, where the epicenter of Baal worship was. Deuteronomy 3. For only Og, the king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. He is the guy who had a 15-foot long by 6-foot wide iron bed, and he and his compatriots were the original Freemasons. Now, if you recall earlier, we had read some verses from the Old Testament that talk about these Amorites building these huge fortified cities with walls and brazen bars and gates. And so when this guy, J.L. Porter, passed through this region to do research on it, he said that he had stumbled onto many cities all across that region that had these humongous structures, these big, huge pillars and walls and buildings and rooms, and that he was quite convinced that these were the royal cities discussed in the Old Testament. Here's one of the drawings right here of what he discovered while traveling through Syria, is these huge pillars with these big, huge walls that were very fortified. And so this is in the days of King Og that these were built, and these are complicated structures to build.
So these Nephilim Canaanite people groups were endowed with these architectural skills, and they were the original stonemasons. And this entire region is covered, it's a very rocky area. That's why some of the cities are named after rocks. And so they learned over time how to apply the craftsmanship to build all this. They were also the smiths, the metal workers, and so they had fashioned all the brazen bars and the fortified city gates. But he's published a lot of literature about these giant cities in Bashan. I also find it interesting that he has the right side up triangle and the upside down triangle dating back to 1877 when he published this. That's just interesting symbolism on the front of the book, considering what we've studied, that's the as above, so below symbolism. And when you merge those together, you get the six-pointed star. I don't know what applicability that has to our lecture here, but I just find that interesting. And continuing on, he does an excellent job of documenting his experience of how he would come into these big, huge royal cities that were totally vacant, and how strange it was to be in a huge city with no people in it. And he would even go through some of the homes, and he slept in some of the giant bedrooms. And it's interesting that this wasn't more publicized, and you can get this book on Amazon or on the internet. But he describes the royal arches. See, this was one of the main symbols of that era. Was there? It took a lot of great skill to be able to build a large archway, and the original masons are the ones who had the skill set to do it. And so you'll find that there's going to be large walls, a lot of royal archways, a lot of large pillars and obelisks, which the Egyptians had, and then you'll find the pillars of Hercules everywhere, right? You'll see the two giant pillars with an archway of some kind, and we're going to discuss the importance of that here in a minute. But now if you fast forward to today, you'll find that in the Masonic faith, there's lots of different organizations that are called the Royal Arch. And we see that in their symbolism, that on the symbol of Masonry, they've got the two pillars of Hercules with the Royal Arch. So this is like a shadow of things from going back a long ways, that the memory of all of this has still been imprinted in humanity even up to today, and that these secret societies still maintain some of these concepts. That's where the Royal Arch comes from, is these giant cities going back all the way to Bashan. Here's some more drawings by Porter demonstrating large structures. You've got a royal arch here. You've got the triangular vestibule, which was invented by the Masons going back thousands of years, with the large pillars.
Same thing here. These are structures that were in Bashan. And you see these big, huge, giant pillars today. Now today, all the archaeologists and everybody, they give the Romans and the Greeks all of the credit for these structures. But in reality, the Romans and the Greeks got it from someone else. They just learned the tricks of the trade from their predecessors, and it's really the Masons who go back to the Canaanites who did all this.
Now it's amazing how Porter showed some of the inside of these buildings with these really ornate designs. Here's one with an arch with pillars on the inside with a stone roof on it. And so we're talking about structures that were built thousands of years ago by the Canaanites, that we're talking about Old Testament history here. And he shows these other areas here with the pillars and the royal arches, and they call this the Mosque of Omar, but that's because it was colonized by the Islamic groups later, but they're not the ones who built it. These structures were built a long time ago by, these Canaanites, which were these large giant men, and they were the original Freemasons. They are the stonemasons of history who built all the megalithic structures, and that knowledge and all of the occultism that was passed down with it has become the religion of Freemasonry today. And that's why we still see all of the symbolism in their iconography. Here are the two big pillars with the royal arch. And here is one of their symbols right here, and you can see These are the pillars of Hercules. Here's the royal arch. We see all the zodiac signs on there, the sun and the moon, the as above, so below. We see the checkered floor, all the different things. And we've already went through all this symbolism, right? We know that, this is King Solomon's temple, that this is Jachin and Boaz, and that King Hiram hired the mason Hiram to build this, but it was really an imitation of the pillars of Hercules that was in the city of Tyre. And we're going to try and kind of connect all of these dots as we continue going forward. But the main point I want to demonstrate is this symbolism that we see today on with the Masons is what we're seeing here. These are the Masons who designed these royal arches. That's why we have groups today that still call themselves the Royal Arch. Now, I just want to reveal to you something that I thought was really interesting. A couple weeks ago, today is January 2nd. It was about 2 or 3 weeks ago that I published Days of Noah 31, which was the big reveal on what the Jachin and Boaz of Solomon's temple was. That's the time that I revealed that was really the pillars of Hercules that the Phoenicians added to the temple. And I was praying about that and thinking a lot about that. And I went to a Christmas party of some friends. And when I walked into their front door, this is what I saw. And I just thought it was interesting. This is how the Lord confirms things for me. And some people are going to say, well, that's just a coincidence. But this is not the typical design that you see when you walk into somebody's house. 2 pillars and an arch. Especially when that's several days after you're publishing a YouTube video on the pillars and the arch. And so you can see the date here. The Lord was gracious enough to give me a confirmation of this whole concept, and I wanted to share that with you. Does that mean that these people who own this house are wicked and evil because they have the pillars of Hercules in their front house? No, they don't have a clue what the pillars of Hercules are. And all of this symbolism and iconography is across this whole planet. The whole world has been restructured to begin to look like and act like and become what it was before the flood. And all of the things that we're studying that happened back then are being mirrored and shadowed again in today's society. That's why we're heading the direction we're heading.
I mean, you can clearly see the resemblance here. I mean, over here on the right is one of the pillars that they found up in Bashan. And over here is the Temple of Hercules in Italy. These great big huge monumental pillars. Same concepts. Same thing here. Here was a diagram of a large structure with a big huge stone door with all of these inscriptions built into it. This was done by these ancient stonemasons who were trained by the fallen angels how to have all the eternal secrets of heaven, all the technology, how to use the metals, how to work with the stones, how to build all the altars and the big royal cities.
So back in those days of Bashan, you had all these huge giant clans of people. They were warmongering people. They would go to battle with the neighboring cities and the neighboring tribes and try and destroy them and conquer their land. And then they would set up these kingdoms. And whenever they would go out to battle and they would conquer another people group, they would come back and they would come into their town through a specific pathway, like this one here, that was designed to gloat and reveal the glamour of their people. And so they referred to these as the triumphal arches. And so here we have the triumphal arch in Tyre. This is in Tyre and Sidon, which are the Canaanite cities that we've studied in the past. And these large Nephilim kings and queens who just got done conquering a people group would then travel through here on horse, and they would pass underneath these big giant royal arches. They call it a royal arch because this was a procession that only the kings and queens would come through to greet the people after they'd gone out and conquered and destroyed other people groups. And this one here is known as the Arch of Baal. Now the word Baal means Lord, and Moloch, the other Old Testament name of Baal, means king. So Baal and Moloch, which we know are Hercules, is where this concept of kingship and royalty come from. Now, what's very bizarre is the fact that they're actually resurrecting these symbols and putting them around the world today. Down here we can see the Arch of Baal that they put in New York City a couple years ago. And it's an exact replica of the one that we see in Tyre and Sidon. Same thing with London at Trafalgar Square. They resurrected the Arch of Baal there, behind the Capitol building with all the pillars, which we now know where all that comes from. Every Capitol building that we see in the world today has all the same architecture that goes all the way back to the original stonemasons. But I think the real question we got to ask is, why on earth would all of the world leaders today resurrect something like this, the original Arch of Baal symbol that goes back thousands of years ago, that was dedicated to the Old Testament God, where there was child sacrifice taking place? I mean, that doesn't make sense that we would resurrect these old symbols and put them in our prominent cities of today. And the reason why it's happening is because it's the same supernatural, sophisticated spirit that's working through today as it was then. And the world leaders are this same corrupt bloodline of people that can be, traced back all the way back to times of antiquity. They're the ones who are moving us closer and closer to the New World Order. And the fact that in the last several years they've slapped up the Temple of Baal, which are the pillars of Hercules, in America and in Europe, I think that's just one more confirmation that we're closer to the last days than people realize.
And you have to admit that it's strangely coincidental that in the Old Testament era, when you came to the Temple of Baal, you did a sacrifice, often human, involving children, and you served the blood of the children to this god, if you will. And now, today in New York City, recently they've passed legislation that allows post-term abortion for babies who are already born now that can be aborted. And people will say, well, that's different, but it's exactly the same thing. And I think the fact that they've put this arch to Baal up in New York City is symbolic of this, because this essentially represents child sacrifice, and that's what they're allowing in New York City. They're saying that if the baby's born and they find something wrong with it or they don't want it, that you can kill it now after it's been born. And that's really no different than what they did in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, they would pass their children through the fire and offer it as a burnt sacrifice to Baal and Moloch. But I don't see how that's any more grotesque than taking a small living baby and actually killing it and destroying it. So, the same sick, satanic, supernatural spirit that was driving the people of the day to do that then is the same exact spirit that's driving the people of the day to do it now. And that's why we see the resurrection of this symbol today.
One area of confusion that I think exists in humanity today is we spend a lot of time looking at Roman and Greek architecture, and we think about how advanced those people groups were, and history tends to give them credit for all the architecture. But just as I've been demonstrating here, this was Bashan. This was the area where King Og existed, and this was developed before Rome and Greece. This is back in the days of Canaan, not long after the flood. And so what we see is that these concepts, the royal arch and the pillars, they didn't come from the Romans and the Greeks. The Romans and the Greeks are just future cultures that were continuing to build off the backs of a people group before them who had come up with that original design. And so when you see things like the Oracle of Delphi, which is a temple to Apollo here in Greece, We've always assumed that the Greeks are the ones who came up with this, but as we're seeing here now, it's not. Before the flood, they were building these ancient temples to the gods, and even after the flood, they were building these ancient temples to the gods. And then later, each culture just adopted that tradition. So now we see the Greeks building temples to the gods. We see the Romans building temples to the gods. If you go into the Pantheon, it's these big, huge circular buildings with all these royal arches and all these pillars, and it's got all these gods in it. And you say, wow, these Romans were amazing. And yes, they had profound building skills, but it wasn't there. They didn't make the template. They're just following suit with what the Greeks did, and the Greeks are following suit with what the people groups before them did. And so it's the original stonemason Nephilim Canaanite giants who were given this knowledge from the angels and who had the size and the strength and the mental capacity to do this. And over time, those secrets and traditions have been taught to men. See, before the flood is where, Tubal-cain, who was the master mason, and all of the Kenites and the Smiths, they began mastering how to build these structures. And then when you had the hybrids, the giants who were manifested in Genesis 6, they had the muscle and the power and the knowledge to get it done. And that's how you see places like this in ancient Syria, these big, huge structures. Regular men didn't do this. Some of these stones are 50 tons in size. But this guy, Josias Porter, really was credited with chronologing a lot of the ruins throughout Syria. And he does an excellent job of displaying the fact and documenting that all of these 60 giant cities that existed in Bashan, there's remnants of many of them today that can be seen archaeologically, and other cultures have settled these areas. So it gets confusing because you've got newer cultures living within these ruins, but nonetheless, they're still there. See, the Arch of Baal is the original royal arch that was used for the royal bloodlines of the Nephilim to pass through it. And that became a dominant symbol within those cultures who were all the large stonemasons and stone squares. And that's why today when you see a Masonic temple, you're going to see all the archways. That's just what it is. And then cultures who came later, the power structure that existed within Rome and Greece and Egypt, they were all taught the secrets of the secret societies. They were all taught the secrets of the architecture in the building. And so they incorporated it into all their stuff too. And so today we see all these different monuments with the Royal Arch. But you have to understand that the Royal Arch has an origin, and the origin is nefarious. Does that mean if you're walking down the road right now and you see a building with an archway on it, that it's some kind of evil arch? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But what it does mean is that everything that we see today is based on an origin, and the roots of all that are the fallen angels, Genesis 6, the hybrids, the Nephilim. That is the root of it all. Our money, our currency, the secret societies, most of our religions, our architecture, all of it. When you go back into the Dark Ages and you look at all the big kingships and the kingdoms and the castles, the same castles that are on all the royal crests, along with all of the double-headed phoenixes and dragons, who do you think built all these? The Masons built these. Here's your Royal Arch. And these are the cities. Remember how it started in 1 Kings 4, that in Bashan they had great cities with walls and bars and cross beams. That's where all this stuff came from. These were from these warring Nephilim Canaanite clans. And so where this Royal Arch here, that's what we're seeing here, right? It's originally the Arch of Baal or the Arch of Hercules, and they've incorporated it into the formation of a castle. See, a lot of this knowledge has been lost in history. Today, the world would have you believe that the Romans are responsible for these structures and the Greeks are responsible for these structures. We'll compare the two. They're the same thing. So, which one came first? Was it the Romans or the Greeks? Well, you have to look at history.
and see who came first. The Greeks were before the Romans. And so, and what you learn is that the Greeks didn't just invent all of this architecture. They got it from the ones before them, the Babylonians and the Canaanites, and it goes all the way back to before the flood. And it comes from these large, giant men who were given special knowledge on how to build stones. They started the template that every culture has continued to use, even right up to modern day architecture and design. And, you know, all the cultures that followed, they use it for the gods. I mean, you know, here's the Greek Parthenon. This is where you go in and worship all the Greek gods. And here's the arch to Constantine. You know, same thing. You see the big, huge archway with the pillars. And here's another pillars of Hercules right here. And then we see, you know, the Arch of Baal. And then when you go to many of the Roman Catholic churches and a lot of the European architecture throughout, even up through the Renaissance period, it's the Masons who were the part of the upper hierarchy, who were all the royalty, and, you know, all of the kings and the queens and the princes were all part of the Masonic fraternity. And they maintained all the architecture and all of the design with all these archways all throughout the last several thousand years. But in addition to that, they also maintained all the secrecy, all the witchcraft, all the sorcery, and the magic that comes with it. Because it requires sacred geometry to build all this, and we still haven't got into the sacred geometry, but it's not a coincidence that, you know, pentagrams and hexagrams and triangles are used in the occult, because it's through masonry and the sacred geometry of shapes that they're able to acquire the power. And what you begin to realize is nothing's changed today, because this is a structure built in the last couple hundred years, which is a Masonic temple in Georgia. And when you compare that to a several thousand-year-old Greek temple, it's the same thing. And you look over here at a Roman temple, and it's the same thing. They even call it a temple, a Masonic temple. And this was a Greek temple, and this was a Roman temple. So this is where you worship the gods. And that's what happens when you go into a Masonic temple. It's the same concept. That's why you have 33rd degree Freemason Aleister Crowley, who's a known Satanist and occultist, who is always doing these weird symbols. And what do you think he's doing here? Why on earth is he wearing this great big triangular hat? Because that represents this vestibule right here. And then what do you think these two things are right here? They're obviously the pillars, Jachin and Boaz, which are the pillars of Hercules. And, you know, coincidentally, he has a pyramid on his hat with an all-seeing eye in the middle of it. Same one that we have on our dollar bill. And that pyramid happens to be inside of a, if you look at this rays of illumination here, that makes a six-pointed star. And it's through the sacred geometry of the hexagram and the pentagram that all of this Masonic religion and fraternity exists. But, you know, here you see throughout history dating to today, and then fast forward to right now. This is a Masonic temple here in the United States. There's a Freemason symbol, and then you can tell that it's been built on the same concepts. So if the Masons built their temple right here and here, and I'm showing you pictures of Greek and Roman temples that are exactly the same, therefore you can safely deduce that the Masons of the Greeks' day are the ones who built that, and the Masons of the Romans' days are the one who built that. In other words, every culture going all the way back to the Nephilim Canaanites had this secret Masonic religious system within its structure, and they're the ones who've been responsible for controlling humanity, building all the great buildings and altars to the gods. And then when that culture and civilization got wiped out and the next one took over, those same secrets passed down to the next culture all the way to modern times. That's why we have an Egyptian obelisk in Washington, D.C. That's why we have a, as they referred to it, a Baal shaft in Washington, D.C., which represents the phallus of Baal or Hercules. So make no mistake, Everything we have today, all of our architecture, our currency, everything is just a counterfeit and a knockoff of the pre-flood and immediate post-flood world. And it's becoming more and more like that every day. And this satanic spirit that exists in this country now is really taking it to the next level. And we're going to continue to try and uncover that. And the Egyptians aren't any different. They've got a little twist on some of their architecture, but they still have got the pillars and the archways and just different looking statues. But I assure you that the Masonic religion is the ones who built all the Egyptian monuments as well. The Masons did all that as well. That's why they're shrouded in Egyptology. That's why you got Aleister Crowley over here wearing an Egyptian outfit. That's why you see the Sphinx right here in this Egyptian sanctuary. You see the pyramid. You see the Egyptian sun up here. See how they blend everything together? And then here's the Bible, of course. So Egyptology is a big part of it. Here's the Star of David right here. It looks like, or a five-pointed star. It's interesting how you see some of the Masonic symbolism even in Hollywood and music. Here is a song that had a lot of Egyptology shrouded within it, and it's Katy Perry. And as she's walking up this pyramid, she's rising to this level of like deification where she's becoming like this goddess, if you will. And here's the cover of it, right? We see one pyramid pointing down, one pyramid pointing up. It's the as above, so below mentality. And the union of those two is her rising to this point where she's become connected with the divine, and she's now like this godlike woman. But you see the Egyptology shrouded in Freemasonry because it's all connected. Here is the Masonic symbol, and this is the Egyptian disc, the winged disc, which represents Horus. And that's who she's supposed to be representing here as well. And here it is again right here. That same winged disc is the same one on the front of this Masonic temple. You say, well, why is that? Because it's all interconnected. The Phoenician Canaanites are the ones who settled Egypt and all those areas. They're all interconnected. Over here you see an image of Lady Gaga. And what do you notice about her? She's in the shape of a pyramid pointing up, and it's inside of a pyramid pointing down. I mean, it's all around us. And so as you continue to study the Masonic religion, they go into a temple and they have a grand high priest. And we've already discussed they're the Royal Arch Masons. We know where that comes from. And as you look at some of their symbolism, you see the chairs that have the pyramid on them. And you see the G that stands for the great architect of the universe, which it also stands for geometry. We see the five-pointed star. I pulled this image right here. This is the five-pointed star that comes from Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. So, with the lightning bolt in it. So, they use these symbols for a reason because it dates back to the seed of the serpent and the Phoenician Canaanites who invented all of this entire construct. Here's a Masonic temple with the Royal Arch and a five-pointed star pointing down. That's a pentagram. Here's another Masonic temple in Utah with an Egyptian Sphinx on the front and the Egyptian sun right here, the solar disk with which represents Horus with the big large pillars. And we continue to see other symbols too, like the six-pointed star inside of a circle. That's a hexagram. People refer to this today as the Star of David. And really it's the Seal of Solomon. We're going to get into that in the next one or two lectures. That's a very important lecture about this symbol. I think we've done our due diligence in past lectures proving where that symbol comes from. It comes from the Masonic symbol. It can be connected to the Phoenician Canaanites, which is, we're going to show that, demonstrate that in future lectures. We've already proven that they're the ones who made the currency. All of those who are in the secret societies designed these symbols like Aleister Crowley did here. We see it here in a Masonic temple. And, it definitely has nothing to do with David, but it has everything to do with Solomon, who we've shown in past lectures the Masons are obsessed with. So I assure you that this is not the Star of David. Christians who are walking around with the Star of David on their chest because they think it represents Israel and King David and the bloodline of David have been duped. It's not the Star of David, it's the Seal of Solomon. That's why they put it on the front of the currency in such a hidden fashion. That's why all of the people who are in the secret societies know that that's what it is. I assure you that Aleister Crowley didn't draw this six-pointed star up here on this hat. See the all-seeing eye with the rays of illumination, Lucifer? He didn't draw that six-pointed star on there because he's interested in King David. It's got nothing to do with David. It has everything to do with King Solomon and the lesser keys of Solomon and the grimoires that Solomon wrote, because when Solomon had fallen into idolatry, he became the godfather of witchcraft and sorcery, and all of these wizards and magicians ever since then have been studying him, and that's why the symbol's on his hat, because it represents Solomon, not David. This is probably one of the more controversial areas where you find Christians who they refuse to believe that that six-pointed star on the flag of Israel and the Star of David could have anything evil incorporated with it, irregardless of how much information you reveal to them. They refuse to believe that because, Israel is God's holy nation and God's holy people. But, Israel did a lot of evil things back in the day, and they're capable of doing that again now. You see things like this. Masonic Temple in Georgia, 1776, has a picture of the Royal Arch with the pillars of Hercules with the wreath wrapped around it. If you go back a couple lectures ago, that's where the dollar symbol comes from. Remember? First it was the two big pillars that had the wreath wrapped around it, and eventually they shortened it to just two dashes with a S on it. That's exactly what this wreath and pillars represent right here. And look what they say, a beautiful reproduction of the Greek temple Athena. Yeah, but no one ever taught us that the Greek temple Athena was just a counterfeit knockoff from the cultures before it, dating back to the original Masons. So all this time, we've been made to believe that these were just, the Greeks are the ones who came up with all this architecture. Handmade by slaves, of course, stood on this corner, the Royal Arch Masons. So make no mistake, this Royal Arch goes all the way back to the Arch of Baal. Here's a perfect example. The past 4 lectures have spent so much time looking at the 2 pillars of Hercules with the arch. This is one of the pillars. Here's the other, Jachin and Boaz, with the 2 planets. One of them has a celestial and terrestrial meaning. One is divine, one is human. The as above, so below. And that's exactly what the 6-pointed star represents. The pyramid pointing down and the pyramid pointing up is as above, so below. That's what they use in all Hermetic knowledge to perform spells and put spells and do witchcraft on people. And it all dates back to the Phoenician and the Canaanites with the Royal Arch. So that's what it is. Now this brings us to the sacred geometry. See, when you study witchcraft and black magic and sorcery, you always find that there are these very specific geometrical shapes and images that are used to achieve the magic. So the building of King Solomon's temple was performed by expert operative masons who understood the science of geometrical proportion in its practical applications. This was the source of sacred geometry used in all witchcraft. So, for example, here is the Masonic symbol for the circle. They make 2 lines, and then they use a compass and a square, and they can create a circle out of that. See, geometry is a very sophisticated subject matter. And then from there, if you move over to the right, now they can use those same images by using the circle right here. They could then create a triangle. And over time, they were taught all of these lessons on how to build all of these sacred geometrical shapes. So when you look at the symbol for Freemasonry, you have the compass. There it is. That's what they used over here to create the circle, the magic circle. You have the square right here. That's what they use to create all the right angles that you see in pyramids and pentagrams and so on and so forth. And so, when you look at these symbols of Masonry, it was back thousands of years ago that this secret society, these Canaanites, the ones who derive all the way back to Tubal-cain, the seed of the serpent, they were given this special knowledge. See the rays of illumination? They were the ones who were given all the knowledge on the sacred geometry and how to make these shapes. You can't build these fantastic structures, and you can't make circular columns with triangular vestibules on them unless you understand all of the geometry and the mathematics. That is a language and a science that had to be learned. And back then, instead of, it wasn't chemistry, it was alchemy, but that is what they practiced, and that is where the sacred geometry comes into play today. See, we have to understand that the sacred geometry can be applied in occult sciences. So while the Canaanite Nephilim tribes were applying their spiritually acquired construction skills to build all the royal cities and the Arch of Baal and the Pillars of Hercules, etc., they're also acquiring their techniques for sorcery and witchcraft, which is where the sacred geometry originated. And it's the fallen angels who had taught them about the stars and the planets and the constellations and etc. So, within the occult world, the entire study of demonology is wrapped around sacred geometric shapes that serve as focal points for demons, such as crystals and pyramids, etc., and they serve as the portals by which demons can enter the human body. Sex, torture, and blood sacrifices are often used to attach powerful demons to victims. According to high-level demonology, certain powerful spirits can be manipulated using ceremonial magic involving sex, blood, sacred geometry, and the 4 earthly elements, as well as combining planetary alignments. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. We reviewed the book of Enoch earlier. The book of Enoch said that all of these things were taught to mankind. The earthly elements, the planetary alignments, all of the geometry learning was taught by them. So, Hermes Trismegistus, which is an ancient text that all Freemasonry and secret societies are based on, is the primary principle for the working of the universe, as above, so below. What happens in the spirit world is a reflection of what happens in the physical world. Simply put, what happens on this earth can be controlled, manipulated, and redirected based on the metaphysical link between the unseen realm and the enlightened few. So, once again, you look at some of these symbols here. This is your typical witchcraft ritual, okay? They've drawn a circle, right? The sacred magic circle. From there, they put a 5-pointed star in the middle of it. We just read that the sacred geometry is necessary to act as a focal point and a portal by which the demons can enter. Then we have the sun right here and the moon right here. These represent the different planetary alignments. We have the 4 elements: wind, fire. Usually these are some are full of dirt. You have fire, you have water in one of these, and you have to represent the 4 earthly elements. And then you need the blood. So there's the dagger to cut yourself or do the sacrifice to release the blood. And then here is the book that has the spells that you're going to recite. And this is what you're going to do to put a spell on somebody or do witchcraft. And so what I would submit to you is these ancient Freemason, stone quarrying, Nephilim giant royal peoples who were building all these ancient megalithic structures, building all of these pillars and towers and temples to their gods. As they mastered all of the sacred geometry to do all that, they also learned all these techniques of witchcraft and sorcery at the same time, and it all became merged together to be the secret societies of this Masonic religion based on Hermeticism that's been passed down from group to group to group to group, going all the way back to today. And so you have to take this into consideration when you look at this, at the sacred geometry. This is a 6-pointed star with an upside down triangle on top of a right side up triangle. It has tremendous as above, so below Hermetic meaning to it. And Solomon is the one, as we're going to find out later when we get deeper into the study on Solomon, he is the one that really, where this really moved forward, especially in the nation of Israel. And so that is where this seal comes from. That's why over here on the right, you'll see, this seal with the G in it, which is what we see on the Masonic symbol, stands for the great architect of the universe inside of the pillars with the holy royal arch. Make no mistake, the 6-pointed star is a Masonic symbol. It represents the as above, so below. When the two columns find equilibrium between them, it will signify the union of the Sushumna and the Kundalini. This was Albert Pike, one of the famous 33rd degree brigadier generals of the Civil War. And here he is using Hindu and Eastern mysticism concepts that we already studied the Kundalini spirit. There's supposedly 33 vertebrae from the top of the spine all the way down to the small of your back. That's another reason why there's 33 layers and 33 levels of Freemasonry. That as you learn, as you go through the rituals, as you climb the staircase here, and you do the rituals, you do the initiations, you undergo all of the witchcraft and the magic, and you continue to head up to the top where the rays of illumination are, and you learn from the secret society and you get closer to Lucifer up here, that meanwhile you're receiving this Kundalini spirit, and that Kundalini spirit is that serpent that travels up the spine, up the base of the spine, going through the 7 chakras that are giving you all of the awakening and the nirvana and the zen that the Eastern religions talk about, until it finally gets to your skull where you have the Kundalini awakening. And that's what Albert Pike is talking about right here. The sacred marriage creates a fire mist. That's that electrical burning, radiating sensation that goes up through the top of your head, that radiates throughout the human body, filling it with divine light. It is then that humanity will become the 3rd column of the temple wisdom. And this act forms the lost word in the vibratory system of the soul's physical embodiment. This is what the occult and the New Age and all of Eastern mysticism is about, is giving you this false divine light so that it'll change your vibration and frequency, so that it'll affect your soul's physical embodiment to align yourself more with the God of this world as opposed to the true God of the Scripture. And you say, well, where did all this come from? We know it comes from before the flood. We know it comes from the Nephilim. Whether, it's difficult to receive, but the fallen angels manifested themselves on this planet, and they contaminated the DNA, and they manipulated humanity. And that's why every rendition that you see of the ancient lost city of Atlantis, look at what we see. These are different people who've painted different renditions. All the giant pillars of antiquity, the Arch of Baal. Here's the Arch of Baal with the pillars, Greek and Roman heads with the big, huge temples, the big pyramids. All this time we thought that was just the Greeks and the Romans. But in reality, that was the pre-flood world where all the Hermetic knowledge was being built up. And then God destroyed that. And then right away, the nation of Babylon's formed right after the flood. And we begin to see it get picked back up again. And they've been working towards that ever since, all the way to modern time. See the ruins of the Temple of Hercules at the Strait of Gibraltar? This represents the Strait of Gibraltar, and this is the ruins of the Pillars of Hercules. This ancient knowledge goes back through the seed of the serpent. This is supposed to be a picture of the big giant demigod Hercules carrying his pillars right here. And you'll see a set of pillars in the background, because it was these big giant demigod, half human, half hybrid Nephilim that were the ones who were endowed with all of the abilities, the knowledge, and the power to do this stuff. And then mankind learned from them and followed suit. This is why Sir Francis Bacon, when he was talking about his book, The New America, which he referred to as the New Atlantis, and how the Europeans were going to have to set sail up into the northwest area to start this new utopian society where the sun sets, that this new Atlantis was, it's not a coincidence that they're sailing in between the pillars of Hercules. So there's all this deep, occult, esoteric, hidden symbology, but it all has to do with what the scriptures always said from the beginning. Right out of the gate, Genesis 3:15, there's going to be a battle between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And that's going to go all the way to the last days. And this, everything that we've been reviewing has to do with the seed of the serpent. And that has to do with the secret societies, the Masonic religion, etc. Here's a perfect example of a structure that was built up in Lebanon, which we know is at the base of Mount Hermon, where the epicenter of Baal worship took place. A 1,500-ton stone. This is known as Baalbek. They had an entire temple complex there. But look at the size of this stone right here. I mean, there's just no way. To this day, mankind still doesn't know how they made this stone. Well, we know that Baal was the god that the Canaanites served. We know that we had people like King Og of Bashan, who was one of the remnant of the giants. He was just a watered down version of him. He was 15 foot tall. There's no telling how big the Nephilim was that built this stone. And then later, the different cultures renamed it. The Greeks and the Romans renamed this entire temple Heliopolis. And because Helio means the sun, and they were sun worshipers. And so, each culture comes along and renames it and adds their little nuance to it. And then over time, history gives them the credit for it. But they're not the ones who built this. The Greeks and the Romans did not build this temple in the stones of Baalbek. The Phoenician Canaanites did. Here's more images of this temple complex in Baalbek. I mean, just look at some of these structures. You can see where there's many pillars, big, huge walls circumferentially. It's just it's an incredible complex. Same thing here. These are the columns of Baalbek. Some of them are still standing today. And you compare those to some of the renditions that Leslie Porter put in his book on the ancient cities of Bashan. You see the same kind of stuff. This took tremendous skill thousands of years ago for a people group to put these perfectly cylindrical pillars and to put all these little ornate details within them. These were the great masons, the stonemasons of antiquity, that people never fully understood how they got it done. Well, it was supernatural. Look at the size of it compared to these people down here. I mean, how on earth did thousands of years ago, without cranes and all of the different cables and technology, how could they have possibly built this structure that big when a regular human being is that size? It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. And where did they get the knowledge to do it? Well, now we know. They got it from the fallen angels. It was the eternal secrets of heaven that mankind was never supposed to know. I mean, same thing here. Look at these archways, these big, huge archways. If you've got people, if this is a 6-foot tall man right here, why on earth would they build an archway that big? They could build one 10-foot tall. They wouldn't go to all that time and energy and trouble to build a 60-foot archway unless one big, huge person was going to be occupying this space as they walk through into this huge temple. You have to scale this thing and think about it from that perspective. Here's a man right here. Men aren't going to build this for no reason at all, but giant men are going to build it to scale based on the size of their bodies. This is why the great occultists of the past have always been obsessed with these kind of concepts. It's not a coincidence that Helena Blavatsky, who started the Theosophical Society, has many written works about the Pillars of Hercules. It's not a coincidence that Plato wrote about that. It's not a coincidence that we see it in the biblical version. It's not a coincidence that you have occultists like Edgar Cayce and Ruth Montgomery, who used to have visions and dreams that they would document about these things, who were deeply steeped in the occult and had the spirit of divination. So this is the true source of all this is Atlantis, the pre-flood world that the Nephilim coexisted within. Well, I think we'll wrap this lecture up with this final slide, but it begs the question, is that what these pillars really were? As they refer to them, the twin towers, the twin pillars, could those have possibly been the Pillars of Hercules? I think it's reasonable that they could have, and it's not a coincidence that the destruction of those towers is what's really triggered the next step in the process of the beast system. When you go back in history and you look at the collapse of the Twin Towers, those towers represent trade and commerce of the entire world, and when they went down, that really kicked off the global economic depression and the housing crisis and many of the other things that have happened as a consequence. And that was the beginning of the end of the dollar. The dollar has been affected from that ever since, and one of these days when they finally bring the dollar down, out of the ashes of that world reserve currency will birth a new currency, and it'll be an electronic digital cashless system, and you'll have to receive a mark and a chip and the whole 9 yards. And so I really believe that you can see it within the symbolism. It's not a coincidence that they took out the two twin pillars here and they put up the one world freedom tower. And right there, one world. They're trying to say that, we went from 2 to 1, and it's not just 2 to 1, it's the amalgamation. It's the right side up, upside down pyramid. That they literally put the same symbol you see here, 2 pyramids superimposed on top of each other, is the same symbol you see here, 2 pyramids superimposed on top of each other. And so, in my opinion, this is the ultimate symbol for the New World Order. It represents the seed of the serpent. It represents the genetic contamination of Genesis 6. It represents the fallen angels and the hybrids. And it represents the future genetic manipulation of humanity, which we are now finally on the forefront of. And this is ultimately, this event of bringing down the Twin Towers was really the coming out party for the New World Order, and the beginning of that next step in totally solidifying that system. And now we're watching that slowly play out. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. It's like erosion of a mountain. It's happening slowly, incrementally. It's very difficult to see it on a daily or weekly basis, but from year to year and decade to decade, you can see the process happening. And obviously it's being governed by the prince of the power of the air, the supernatural spirit that Jesus referred to as the God or ruler of this age or of this world, Satan and his fallen demonic hierarchy. And that fallen demonic hierarchy work through humanity, specifically the secret societies, the royal bloodlines, and the Illuminati who've been on this planet ever since. So on that note, I think I'll end it there. Godspeed, and we'll see you on the next one.